Whelen Tools' Radial Axial Bearing Tool, or R.A.B., is used to accurately check the tolerance of H64 main rotor and tail rotor pitch link bearings. The R.A.B. is shipped and stored in a shatterproof and watertight container. It is custom fitted for the fixture. The moving parts on the fixture are stabilized in the case when positioned correctly. Remove the R.A.B. from the case and place it on a flat, stable work surface. The R.A.B. has 4 feet on the bottom that need to be in contact with the work surface at all times. This allows for accurate and repeatable measurements. The R.A.B. is always to be operated from the front. This allows the operator easy access to all of the handles and direct view of the indicators. For this demonstration, we will operate it from the rear to afford a clearer view of the controls. The fixture is fabricated from a couple of different materials, each of which have been coated for maximum life. They are anodized aluminum and steel with black oxide treatment. The brass is in its natural state and requires no special coatings. The fixture is very low maintenance and easy to operate. Aside from yearly calibration, the R.A.B. needs only to be wiped down after each use and stored in its case. Before each use, you will calibrate the R.A.B. by utilizing the master gauge. Each R.A.B. is shipped with a master gauge, and it is stored in the front and secured with a strap. This is where the gauge needs to be returned and secured for storage and transporting. Remove the strap from the master gauge and place it into the axial assembly and tighten it up. It has a built-in clutch, so you can't over-tighten it. It will slip and you'll hear a lock-in. Now, we're as tight as we need to be on the axial, and you lower it onto your radial. Tighten up your horseshoe clamps, starting with the back first. There is not a clutch on these clamps, so just adjust the horseshoe clamps so they are finger-tight, just snug, and there's no movement. Loosen up the radial and the axial locks and make sure the aft end clamp is tight. Then wiggle both handles, the radial and axial, to check for residual play in the fixture. Then tighten up the radial and loosen the axial and move the axial handle. There should be about 5 thousandths there. If you are seeing an excessive number, then the fixture isn't calibrated correctly. Tighten the axial and loosen the radial and do the same thing. By moving the radial, we are moving the gauge in this direction and checking for play on this gauge right in front. Note the amount of play in the fixture, and then you are ready to remove the master gauge and measure your first part. When you are done with the master gauge, it should be set off to the side and not back on the trammel bar at this time. It is easier to manipulate the handles with the master gauge removed from the fixture. When you are checking the PC link, you want to check it in 3 different places, so we want to put a mark on the bearing 120 degrees apart. We have a gauge that will let you mark the bearing at those 120-degree intervals quickly and easily. This gives you 3 different points to measure the bearing, so you can be sure there hasn't been any uneven wear. Before you put the link in the fixture, spin the bearing in both directions and make sure it spins freely in its housing. If it is bound up in any direction, manipulate it until it spins free. Lower the link onto the spring-loaded platform and tighten the lock. Just before it is completely tightened, position the bearing so that one of your 120-degree marks is on top. Then finish tightening until the clutch slips. You want to make sure that before the horseshoe clamps are tightened, that the PC link is not canted in either direction, and that it is upright and parallel to the post here. Then you lock the aft end clamp and the forward clamp. Be sure the clamps are in contact with a good smooth surface, not on the threads or too far forward. With the radial and axial locks loose, what you want to see is that bearing move. So before you even think about measurements, actuate both handles at the same time. Now you can visually confirm the movement of the bearing and the PC link. Now, find a halfway point between the extremes and lock down the axial and radial locks in those approximate halfway points. What that does is center the bearing inside the housing. To measure axial travel, you loosen the axial lock, go all the way forward with your axial handle, and set the axial gauge at 0. You do that by loosening the face on the gauge, turning it to 0, and locking it back down. Move the handle in the other direction, and that gives you the full travel. In this case, the indicator reads about 30 thousandths. This shows how the bearing moves in axial travel when you move the handle. Log the axial information and move on to the next measurement. Tighten the axial lock, loosen the radial lock, and then actuate the radial handle. You push the handle forward, loosen the face on the radial gauge, and set it to 0. Then move the handle in the opposite direction to see the full radial travel. Go back and forth a couple of times to make sure of the reading. Log the radial information. Now you can loosen the bearing and spin it until the next mark is on top, and take axial and radial readings of the bearing in this position just as before. Do this for all 3 marks and log all the information. To check the other end, loosen the clamps. Flip the link over. Line up the mark and tighten the horseshoe clamps as before. The R.A.B. also adjusts to fit different styles and lengths. Just loosen the aft end clamp assembly, rotate it, and slide it back onto the special hex bar. The R.A.B. is designed to accommodate many different size bearings and PC links. If a rod needs to be replaced because of excessive wear, you can use the trammel bar to get a measurement before replacing the rod end. To do this, you drop the PC link onto the pins as shown. Then pull back all the way on the gauge, loosen the faceplate, and set it to 0 and lock it down. Then push all the way forward to see the full travel. Pull back until the gauge is halfway between, which will be the center, and lock the pin to that length. With the center set, when it's time to replace that rod end, you screw in a new rod end until the bearings drop back down onto the pins of the trammel. Use the R.A.B. regularly to improve the accuracy and efficiency of PC link bearing measurement and replacement.